welcome to the webinar where I'm Nick and this is CC next to me here. I see some names in the chat there that were on our webinars last week around injection drug use. Today we're focusing around crack smoking supplies. Just a bit of a background, CC and I work with the Ontario HIV and Substance Use Training Program. Some people refer to us as Oh Shut Up. We're ministry funded through the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care, and we do training capacity building around the province around harm reduction, HIV, and Hep C. And this is part of a series of webinars looking at the equipment being distributed through the Ontario Harm Reduction Distribution Program to increase our sort of capacity and understanding of that. So that's us, Oh Shut Up. We're on the call. We also have the Ontario Harm Reduction Distribution Program, and Nadia has joined us. I see she's saying hi in the chat there. Nadia will be available to chime in as we go, but also to answer any specific questions once we get through the majority of the webinar. And in terms of who else is participating today, these webinars we're really targeting folks working within harm reduction programs, primarily injection drug use outreach workers, hepatitis C support teams, and nurses at health units throughout the province. There will be a variety of understanding and knowledge on the call. For some folks, this may be going back to basics.
Has joined the conference.
It hurts to make sure we're all working from the same place, using the same language and consistency. And for other folks on the call, you may be brand new to harm reduction, just starting off in it, and you may not know anything. So again, there's that variety of experience on the call, and I think that's it's good though that we can all share and learn from each other.
Yes, and just a quick note about myself. This is CC again. Just letting you know, for those of you listening in, you might hear me annoyingly clear my throat in the background. Just FYI, I have Tourette syndrome, and it's something I do, and I'll hopefully it's not too disruptive, but just wanted to let people know, don't worry about Nick. I'm not going to get him sick or anything. So I'm not contagious, but that's what I do, and hopefully it won't be too disruptive.
All right, thanks. So just also to practice this polling and just to get a sense of everyone on the call, I'm going to pull up a poll here, and we're just trying to get a sense of where in the province everyone is located. So you just have to click the little buttons there, and we'll be able to see where folks on the call are. So I'll just give that a minute for you all to respond. We've created some broad categories there, recognizing not everyone fits neatly into those, but just to give us a sense. So let's have a look here. Not everyone's clicked yet, but I'm going to show you how everyone's responding. And on today's call, we've got a number of people from different parts. These webinars seem to be attracting a lot of people from southwestern Ontario. I noticed that the other day. We had a number of folks from down there, so interesting. We may have folks from around the province join us later on. I don't see anyone from northwestern Ontario yet, but we were expecting some folks on today's webinar. So again, I think it's interesting to see that these are issues that are happening around the province, and it's important to share and learn from each other, because there are some commonalities in our work, but there are some regional differences too. So I think that'll be important, particularly, and CC mentioned this the other day on the webinar, in terms of the language that gets used. It can look
has joined the conference
around the province. So we'll get you to chime in later about
has joined the conference.
Maybe different. Just a bit of a background in terms of the webinars, and if you're on, apologize if you saw this last week, but just for newer folks, these webinars have been a couple of years in the making.
Has joined the
they
conference.
were once the new best practice recommendations for harm reduction supplies were developed in, I think, 2013, 2014. We started looking at developing these webinars. A number of people involved in the development, obviously here at Oh Shut Up and OHRDP. There's some folks from the ministry, And then we had representatives from a couple of different health centers or HIV organizations around the province. We wanted to include some regional variation there too. Critical to all the work we do
Has
at
joined the conference.
from people with lived experience and involving people that have lived experience around drug use or Hep C or HIV. And in the development of these webinars, we sat down with people that use drugs and peers from different programs around the province, again, making sure we had that regional representation. So just wanting to acknowledge the input from those peers, particularly the folks in Thunder Bay. If you don't know Elevate Northwestern Ontario, that was formerly AIDS Thunder Bay. They've changed their name. We had folks in Sudbury, Ottawa, and Toronto. And then obviously lots of input from OHRDP. So again, the purpose of these is to ensure that we have consistent knowledge about the crack smoking equipment being distributed through OHRDP. On the call last week, a couple of days ago, there were some folks around the province that are not actually distributing the equipment yet. It is newer. Some programs were doing it well before OHRDP started distributing the equipment. They had their own funds, raised their own money, and were purchasing supplies themselves. But now that there's that sort of central source for all the equipment, I think it's important that we're all, again, using the same language, giving the same kind of messaging around the province. So it's to gain a better understanding of the best practices as it relates to all of that stuff, and again, learning from one another and sharing insights and networking with each other as well. So in terms of where we're going to go, we have, we'll try and get through this in an hour and a half. We've left 2 hours just to be sure we get through everything. But this is what we'll be talking about. I think it's important that we understand what we're talking about when we say crack cocaine, so we'll have a bit of a discussion around that. Looking a bit about some of the stereotypes and stigma that are associated with people that use crack, and looking at how people are using crack. And then getting into the specific equipment and the best practice recommendations around each of those. And then we're going to leave you with some resources for additional reading and understanding. And she's playing around with it there, I'm not sure.
Has joined the conference.
Leave it on.
Yeah, it's on.
Okay, here's another poll. And if someone on the phone, if you can mute your phone, please, we'd appreciate that. *6 if you need to mute your phone. So are you currently working in a program that's distributing crack smoking equipment? Yes or no? And I've actually included I'm not sure, but I would hope you know if your program's distributing this stuff or not.
Julie from Halton Region.
Has left the conference.
It's not working. Okay. All right, just looking for a few more responses here. Okay. I'm going to make this a little smaller. And let's see how everyone's responding here. So the majority of folks are working in programs distributing equipment, but there's 20% of us, about a quarter of us, actually not working in programs or in programs that are currently not doing that. So maybe you're on the call. You can, again, type in the chat box maybe how long you've been working in harm reduction, let's say. Maybe there's some people that are newer. So maybe just practice chatting in the chat box there. You could tell us how long you've been working within harm reduction, and let's get a sense of people on the call here. Oh, no, that's okay. So we've got 4 years, just over a year. Scott, happy 1-year anniversary. 7.
We also had someone earlier who was 10 plus years in Halton.
Right. So a number of folks newer to it. Some folks been doing it a while. So again, Desiree there, almost 10 years. So again, real variety in terms of how long people have been working within harm reduction. So again, this may be newer to some folks, or some of you may be well versed in this. Again, I think it's important to make sure that we're all working from the same place. Okay. So just understanding a little bit more about crack cocaine, let's talk about what is it and how is it used. Before we do that, I just want to ask a question. Again, type away in the chat box here, but would you say, or you can also raise your hand if you'd prefer to speak on the phone, but are powdered cocaine and crack cocaine the same drug? I'm going to leave the question like that, and you guys type away, or if you want to, again, raise your hand, do that as well. And it's totally okay if you're not sure about it, and let us know too. Okay. Most people are suggesting no, and I think we'll clarify some things here, because on the one hand I would say yes, no, but sorry. On the one hand I'd say you're right, no, but on the other hand I would say yes, they are actually the same drug, and let's just talk a bit about that. So cocaine, whether or not it's powder or crack, cocaine is extracted from the coca plant. And typically it can come out as a sort of liquid or paste, and that gets converted into a powder. So when people are purchasing powdered cocaine, by the time it arrives in North America, they're often buying powder, and that would typically be snorted. Sometimes it can be dissolved or injected, but it isn't very effective
Eastern Ontario
when it's smoked.
Health Unit
has left the conference.
If you're looking to smoke cocaine, you need to convert it into crack, and that's there's a way of doing that by mixing it up with water and baking soda and heating it, and it forms these rocks, and then those can be either smoked or again dissolved and injected. So powder cocaine and crack cocaine, they both are cocaine. They're just coming in a slightly different sort of format, and that's what actually distinguishes them. Crack gets the name from the cracking sound. When you heat those rocks, it can create a little cracking sound, and you'll see the pictures down here. Cocaine in its purest form would be a nice white color. Often it comes in more sort of beigey colors, but it can also come, depending on the adulterant and how it's been processed, in lots of different colors. It's quite accessible. Here, well, this was a sort of average price. I think we found was around about $10 for a small rock, but that, again, there can be regional variation. So I'd be interested. Type away in the box there. Is that price what people are seeing around the province? If you know, in your region, is it going for about that kind of price, or is it something different? And it is available in most communities all around the province. Again, it can be more prevalent in some areas than others, but it is quite accessible. And I think people often talk about crack as being a cheap drug in terms of, well, you can get a small rock for $10, but I sometimes think that's a bit of a misconception, because while some people may just buy one little rock and be high for a little bit, people often binge on crack, and that can become quite expensive. Are there no comments there around the pricing around the province, or is that sort of matching what people are seeing?
On Tuesday's webinar, I think it was, do you remember where it was?
It was in northwest, somewhere in northwestern Ontario, where it's not overly prevalent. But
yeah, they were saying it was about $50 a rock, so that's quite a regional difference.
I think particularly when you get into some of the smaller, more isolated communities in northern Ontario, there can be a big difference. So crack cocaine, again, it's a short-acting stimulant, and if you just take a hit of a rock, it can be a short-lived high, just maybe as short as 5 to 10 minutes, maybe longer for some people. But again, people often redose, and this is where people can be high for hours or even days if they keep on using it. It is that stimulant type drug, so it will initiate a sort of fight or flight type response, increase the heart rate, get the body temperature going. And for some people, again, not true of everyone, it can be associated with compulsive behaviors, restlessness, paranoia, tension. That's usually, though, associated with much higher doses or periods of extended use. And you start seeing the paranoia and the restlessness. That kind of stuff is much more evident in people that have been using, particularly if they've been using for several days. So in terms of powder versus crack, though, this is a guy named Carl Hart. And if you've never heard of him, I really encourage you to look this guy up. He's a neuroscientist in the States, done lots of really interesting research. And he would argue, and I would also argue too, that powder cocaine and crack cocaine are the same drug. They have the same physical effects, okay? What makes them different is the method of delivery. But once you, whether you snort it, inject it, smoke it, you've got cocaine in your system and it's having the same physiological effects. And I think it's important, so it's important to realize, and there's just a little sort of picture showing the chemical structure of the two of them, but they have the same effects once they're in the body, almost identical effects. The real difference, though, is how you deliver them, and that can have a big impact. And we'll look at routes of administration in a little bit later. But typically, when you start smoking things, the drugs get into your system a lot quicker, and can then produce a more sort of intense kind of high because of that. You can click that link there or just copy it for later. It's just an interesting article I found the other day about some of the different myths around crack, and they discuss this difference between them or how they're actually similar. Again, feel free to jump in if you want to challenge us on that or add some your own sort of insights to stuff. I think one of the big things when it comes to crack and powder cocaine, but particularly crack, is the stereotypes that people have around people who use crack cocaine. So what are some of those stereotypes? Maybe people can type in the chat box there. What are some of the stereotypes that people out there in the world have around crack cocaine users?
And just to assure people, we're just talking about what you may be hearing or think that other people think. If you type something, we're not necessarily going to associate that that's what you're thinking.
Right.
But like, what are some common conceptions of what people who smoke crack look like?
Or how they behave, or what they do with their time. We've got several people typing, so we'll give that a second. So we're seeing Byron saying that they can't be trusted. Scott saying people can't manage their lives. They're homeless, uneducated. They can be dangerous or violent. Okay. That's an interesting one. Diane saying that people have disposable income, use it in social gatherings or alone to keep up their energy. So that's a difference there in terms of, those aren't homeless people, right? There are some different sort of images and stereotypes that people have out there. I think it's important to remember, too, in the kind of work that we do, who do we typically see? And we often see people that are struggling with their drug use, maybe having more problems associated with it, and that can influence our sort of perceptions of who people use or how they use. And but the reality is crack cocaine use crosses all classes, all races, and that not everyone smokes every day, and there are real misconceptions around people being daily chaotic users. That might be true for some people, but we'll show you some statistics in a minute. Not everyone is a daily user or as chaotic. I think it is important to remember, though, most people that are using crack cocaine aren't using just crack. There's polydrug use, so people are using multiple substances often and using often more than one route of administration. You're going to add something? Okay. So this is a survey. The data is a little bit older now, but I think it would still be somewhat relevant and still very similar. This was a survey done of people that use drugs accessing health units from around the province, and they asked injection drug users that also smoked crack, how often were you smoking crack in the last 6 months? And you'll see there were a quarter of the sample were daily smokers, but look at this, a third of the folks weren't even smoking every week. So how does that fit in terms of the stereotypes of people as being sort of, they can't control their lives, they're running around, spending all their time and money looking for crack? It's not true. For sure there are some people that get into those patterns, but there are also people that have more control over their use, can use just occasionally, can use when they feel like it or when they have money, and then once they've used, they put it away and they're done for a while. So again, how does this match up with the sort of stereotypes that we have of people that use crack? One of the big things that people talk about in terms of crack use is the stigma they experience around it. So this was a study, again, it's slightly older, but I think it's still very relevant. This was a study done in Toronto looking at homeless folks that use crack and asking them about their experiences around stigma. So one of the places people talked about experiencing stigma was within the healthcare system, particularly within hospitals. And you look at how many folks, over half of the population that use crack said they had been judged unfairly or disrespected within the healthcare system. And that's really concerning. If people are trying to access healthcare, look after themselves, but facing this kind of discrimination, they're likely to stop accessing the kinds of services that they need. And very often people talked about the reasons they were being discriminated against was because of hospital staff's perceptions of their use of alcohol or drugs, or because people thought that they were in there drug seeking. So we hear a lot about the stigma that's associated within the healthcare systems. There was another interesting survey done through the Toronto Drug Strategy looking at people who use drugs, and actually healthcare rated as a high place in terms of the stigma that people experience, but where else do you think people may experience stigma in terms of their drug use? And here again I'd ask you to type in the chat box there. Where else do you think people are experiencing stigma as it relates to their drug use? The workplaces for sure. Folks in Halton are talking about workplace again, friends and family. Yeah. Housing and shelters. I think these are all places for sure. The particular survey that I was referencing, the number one place that people experience stigma related to their drug use was their families. Right? I think that's understandable. I think it also speaks to the lack of support that family members get, and that's something I think within the sort of addictions and mental health world we could be thinking more around how are we supporting family and friends of people that use drugs as well. Just one other note about crack cocaine versus powder cocaine, and this is definitely more prevalent in the States, but I'd be interested to see Canadian data or hear your thoughts on this. But I think it is important to talk about the disparity in terms of how people are being arrested, charged, and convicted. And despite the fact that crack cocaine and powder cocaine are exactly the same drug, they're cocaine, they have the same physiological effects in the body. In terms of how people are being charged in the States or who is being charged, it's overwhelmingly black folks or Caribbean African folks, and they're being sentenced at a rate that's far higher than if they were found with just powdered cocaine. I think that's interesting to recognize and talk about the discrepancies and the differences there. I know Obama has tried to make some changes around that in the States, but it's still you're significantly more likely to be arrested, charged, and convicted if you have crack versus cocaine powder. So again, remember we talked about the difference. One of the differences, though, with powder cocaine versus crack cocaine was the route of administration, and with crack, people are typically smoking it. So I want to just talk about why there's makes a difference there. With most drugs, there are lots of different ways that you can take drugs in. So you can typically smoke or inhale them. Some drugs you can also vaporize as opposed to actually burn them. People can inject drugs, so there's actually intravenous, intramuscular, or subcutaneous, so just under the skin, depending on what you're injecting or how. There are different ways to inject. People may snort drugs up the nose, so they put the drug up the nose and the drug slowly absorbs across the mucous membrane, getting into the bloodstream. Or in a similar way, people can stick drugs in the anal or vaginal cavities, sometimes referred to as hooping, or in sort of medical lingo, you talk about using suppositories. You can often, some drugs can absorb under the tongue, so things like melatonin that people may use in the evening to sleep, or Suboxone, which is an alternative to, methadone for opiate replacement. It's a sublingual drug where it just absorbs in the mucous membrane under the skin. Some drugs will absorb right across the skin, so you think of things like nicotine patches or fentanyl patches. And of course you can swallow drugs too. But all of these different methods have different advantages and risks, and they also affect the intensity and the duration of the high. And this is where I think it's important to understand the difference between snorting powder up your nose versus smoking crack, because it will really affect the intensity and can affect the duration too. Just notice just in brackets we talk about the placebo effect of drugs, so that's where I could maybe give you a tic-tac and say you're going to feel really good in a few minutes and then crash hard later. And you might actually do that just because of your brain's programmed to think a certain way. But this can also impact people's experience with drugs. And a concept that CC and I often use when thinking about people's experiences and risks is the concept of drug, set, and setting. And it's important to look at all three components of that. So what are you actually taking? Who is actually taking it? And what is it that's unique and different about them versus someone else? And then the context in which it's all happening. And these three things all come together to affect people's experiences and risks. So in terms of thinking about these different routes of administration, which of these four here would get the drug to your brain the quickest? And I'm just going to pull up the poll here. Or which would get your drug to which gets the drug to your brain the fastest? Smoking, injecting, snorting, or swallowing? So I'd ask you to see some folks typing in the box there, but just click the poll here, and then we'll have some discussion on this.
Has joined the conference.
So I'll just leave that poll open for another few seconds. So which of these routes of administration here, smoking, injecting, snorting, or swallowing, do you think gets the drug to your brain the fastest? Okay, let's see what people are saying here. The majority of folks are suggesting it's injecting, and then some wondering about snorting, and some suggesting smoking. So before I give you the answer, I think it's important when we're doing drug education with people that we're rooting it in facts and science. And while this may be a subtle difference, the actual answer for this would be is smoking. So I think some people may be wondering, they maybe pick snorting because maybe you think that you snort drugs and they're close to the brain and they just sort of get in there, but that's not really how it works. It actually takes a few minutes for those drugs to absorb across your mucous membrane into your bloodstream, and then they have to get pumped around through the body, and that takes a little bit of time before it can actually get to the brain. It can be several minutes, actually. Injecting and smoking, both will deliver the drugs to your brain very quickly, but there is a technicality here, and where smoking actually gets things to your brain the quickest. And I'll show you this this graphic here. So when you smoke, when you're inhaling air, and you're inhaling oxygen-rich air because you want that to go into your lungs, to your heart, and then up to the brain. And that'll get things there very quickly. When you inject, you're typically injecting into a vein, and that has to go to the heart, it has to go to the heart, then to the lungs, back to the heart, and then to the brain. So if Cece and I were both using crack, and he's injecting and I'm smoking, there may not be much of a perceivable difference there. We're both going to get high very quickly, in less than a minute, sometimes just seconds. But there is a technicality in terms of smoking. We'll get it to the brain just a little bit quicker. Some of the concerns, and we'll touch on these in more detail, but just quickly, is obviously concerns around disease transmissions. We'll look at that. Damage to lungs and airways when you smoke. Again, sharing equipment can lead to disease transmission, and not just HIV or Hep C, but even just regular coughs and colds. And this quick come-on or rush, because those drugs get into the brain so quickly and have this impact, it can be a more intense high, and that can lead to a quicker and harder crash, and potentially making things more addictive. So when people start injecting and smoking drugs, again, this isn't true for everyone, but there's potential for a greater chance of addiction there. The advantages, though, and again, we'll cover some other advantages in a minute, but it can be a lot easier to what we call titrate your dose, which means measure your dose or just check your dose. So you can smoke a little bit and then see how you're feeling, and you might be good. Or maybe you smoke a bit and then you give it a few minutes and you're like, I could use a little more and have another hit. If you're injecting, you can't do that as nearly as easily. It's kind of all or nothing, and it becomes a lot easier to overdose with injecting, because maybe you put too much in there and there's nothing you can do about it. Again, though, with smoking, the effects are felt rapidly, so if you're looking for that quick rush or to get high quickly, smoking is maybe an attractive way of using. Okay. Again, with injecting, though, it can be more and maybe hit you as quickly as smoking, not technically, but in terms of perception. But it can also, I totally just lost my train of thought, I'm sorry. It can be a more, injecting may be a little more intense than smoking, because you can deliver more of the drug in one go. But again, you're increasing your chance of overdose. Any questions yet? Just type away or raise your hands. Right? Again, we're going to come and look at some of these advantages and disadvantages in a little more detail. So other reasons why people might smoke over injecting. At some level, there's less prep work involved, especially if you already have your pipe made, and we'll be looking at the pipes. But it's literally sort of just lighting it and smoking it, whereas injecting, you have to prepare the solution and get it into the syringe and prepare the injection site. Right? So there may be less prep work. But when it comes to smoking crack, we will talk about the chances of disease transmission, but there may be less likelihood in terms of disease transmission compared to injecting. So that's an important consideration. And for folks that are injecting on a regular basis, it can be hard to find veins. You may have damage to your veins. They may be collapsed. So if you need to give your veins a break or you can't find one, it may be an alternative to to injecting, is to go and smoke. I'll let you type in the chat box there, what other reasons do you think people might be smoking over injecting? And while you guys think about that or type some stuff in the chat box, Kim had a question in terms of which method creates a longer high. And that's a great question, Kim. And I'll just go back a slide, or 2 slides, or 3 slides maybe it was. Here we go. So as I said, these different methods of ingestion do have different effects. And interestingly, the ones that get the drug to the brain the quickest and have the quickest effect actually have the shortest duration. So if you were to snort drugs, they typically don't hit you as quickly, but they last a little longer than if you smoke or inject. And actually, if you swallow drugs, definitely they're not going to hit you nearly as hard, but they will last a lot longer in the body. Okay, so if you want the longer high, swallowing or ingesting typically would be the route to go. Okay. So were there other reasons people might smoke over inject? We'll see. There'll be other stuff that may come up as we go through. Some people are just needle phobic. I just don't like to deal with needles, right? Yeah, again, if you can't access your veins. At some level, you may be able to hide it more. Maybe there's less equipment, it's more discreet than sitting there having to actually inject. On the flip side of that, though, in institutional settings, particularly in places like prisons or in bathhouses where often men that have sex with men congregate, you may not want this smoke as a giveaway. So actually people may choose to inject over smoking because it's more discreet at some level in terms of the smoke. Yeah, I think there's an extra layer of stigma around injecting, even within drug-using communities and within drug populations. So you'll have people that smoke crack say, well, I'm not a junkie, and I'm using that language in quotes. So there's different levels and layers of stigma within drug-using communities. Lana makes a really good point there around injecting. So when you inject, often you leave marks and bruising or cuts and abrasions on your arm, and you may not want to have those visible marks, right? So smoking could be an alternative. That's a great point, Lana. Yeah. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about some of the infectious disease transmission then. We're primarily concerned around HIV and hepatitis C. So HCV is hepatitis C virus, okay, and human immunodeficiency virus. And those are the things we're mostly concerned about. One of the things I didn't mention about cocaine earlier is one of the properties about cocaine is it actually has an anesthetizing effect, a numbing effect on the tissues that it touches. And if you've ever seen people snorting cocaine, or maybe in the movies, you'll often see people rubbing it on their gums because they enjoy that sort of numbing effect. It can be a way of checking the quality of your cocaine too. When people snort it up their nose, they'll feel this numb sensation. There are actually, in some parts of the world, cocaine is used as an anesthetic in some medical situations. But because of that, if you're smoking it, it can cause some numbing inside of the mouth and reduce your sense of pain. And you may not be as aware of some of the cuts or burns that may be happening inside your mouth. And another effect of stimulant drugs is that they often cause jaw grinding or clenching. So people will be going like this when they're high on stimulant drugs, and you may be actually getting cuts and abrasions from your own teeth inside your mouth. But if you've been smoking and it's numb inside there, you may not actually realize you have these abrasions inside your mouth. And then if you're engaging in oral sex of some kind, as an example, you may be increasing your chances of HIV or Hep C transmission. Both of those are sort of blood carried in the blood. Okay. Again, when people are smoking crack, and we'll look at some of the pipes in a minute, you can develop real cuts and abrasions, burns, and lips. Often with metal pipes and makeshift devices, the smoke itself can be hot and cause burns, right? Or you may be using pipes that get chipped or cracked, and again, very easy to damage the mouth there. And then that's an obvious site for blood-to-blood transmission. This is slightly older data. We do have some newer data, and I will share a file with you in a minute, but I needed to check with the newer data from Lynn Leonard out of Ottawa. This is some older data from her. It still matches in terms of some of the Hep C and HIV rates. The point being, so this was looking at people that smoke crack in Ottawa, and showing you the HIV and Hep C rates. So this is amongst people that just smoked. There was about 10% had HIV. We see higher rates of Hep C, and this makes sense in terms of how sturdy and strong the Hep C virus is. It's a stronger virus than HIV and more easily transmissible through blood-to-blood transmission. And we see, again, among people who inject as well as smoke, even higher rates. Again, these rates will vary from around the province, and Ottawa actually typically has higher rates in some places. And we could talk about reasons why, but that's probably a whole other webinar. And if we're thinking about then the way that those diseases can be transmitted, they ask the question around, are you using, how are you smoking crack? And people were reporting using previously used equipment. And a number of people saying every time, and some people saying frequently. And look at the number of people here actually passing on devices to others. So this is where you're actually sharing your equipment with each other. Partly this could be because people are unaware of their risks, or maybe that they just don't have access to equipment. I think there's also a social component often to people's drug use, where it's quite a social activity where you're just bonding and sharing stuff as well. This looked at the devices people were using to smoke crack, and we'll look at the recommended equipment in a minute. But people are often reporting using the recommended stuff, but a number of people were using non-recommended equipment here. Okay. So people are often using makeshift devices, and they get very creative in terms of how they make stuff.
Right, and when we think about, I know we were focusing, sorry, this is CC again, I apologize, my video is not working, so you don't get to see my pretty face. But I just wanted to mention, Nick was just doing a good job of talking about infectious disease transmission, but when we think about overall harms, I mean, you look at a pop can, and when you're heating that up, you could be inhaling the fumes from the paint of the pop can. We talk about cuts and burns to the lips. Think about smoking out of a light bulb and what that might do as well. So overall harms are definitely things to consider as well, in addition to disease transmission.
Yeah, for sure. So this was some of that more recent data, and I apologize for, I don't know what's happened to the formatting here, so sorry if that's harder to read. This is more recent. You'll see the numbers are slightly different, but I was hesitant to talk too much about this data because I haven't had a chance to discuss it with Lynn, but I'm going to pull up a file here, and so in this box here, we have a number of different, 3 different files. The one I'm talking about right now is the snapshot. So if you click on that, you can upload that file or download it, I guess. And this is a report that just came out looking at more recent data. Again, it is Ottawa-centric. That's where they did the study. But this is where this data is coming from. And good news is that people are often using glass stems. But still, you see people are using equipment that is not recommended. I think so there can be some work there in terms of the education, but also allowing people better access to equipment. And I think we're starting to see that, especially as OHRDP now are able to distribute that equipment to programs. But we still know there are parts of the province where people don't have access to new equipment. Okay. I will pull up that file box again later, so if you, I'll just leave that open for a second. If you want to download it, I'll pull it up so you can download the other files later as well. This is what we would, when we're saying the recommended pipes, this is what we're talking about, and we'll come back and look at this in more detail. But just compare that, so that's what we talk about, a recommended pipe. And these are examples of pipes that people are making on their own. And just you can even see, look how close to the lips this is and how hot that potentially could get. Oh, I'm using the wrong cursor, right? How easy it could be to burn. That doesn't look like a very nice, clean edge. It looks like it could be sharp. Here, as Cece was mentioning, you can get the paint fumes from the can. And the sharp edges maybe on the pop can. So these are things that people are using when they don't have access to new equipment or don't know about it. Okay, so sorry, that was just to remind me to pull up the file. So again, that'll come up again later for you guys. And that'll give you much more detail in terms of that study. Okay. Here's another poll for you guys. Oh, sorry. I'm just pulling it up. Okay. So, any idea why this picture is being shown? Yes, no, or you're not sure? And remember, we don't know how you're voting, so just put your right answer in there. If you haven't voted yet, click one of those buttons. So why is this picture being shown? Do you know? Yes, no, or you're not sure? And let's see what people are saying. A number of people, about 2/3 of you think you know why that, or know why that picture is being shown, but again, lots of people here not really sure why we're showing this picture, so we'll discuss that. We'll come back and talk about that in a minute. If you're not even sure what the picture is, this is Brillo, or these metal scouring pads for washing your dishes. And we'll come back and talk about why we're mentioning this in a minute, but it has to do with the filters that people are using in their crack pipes. Just before we get into talking about all the specific equipment, here's a picture of someone smoking crack, and we're wondering if we could have a little bit of discussion around what things might you recommend to this person in terms of reducing their Hep C risk or to reduce other harms. And again, feel free to type in the chat box, or if you want to talk on the phone, just raise your hand and we'll get to you. So this is where we might start seeing some people that know a bit more than others talking or telling us what they would recommend. So I think an obvious one would be just not sharing this. I think that's probably obvious to folks. Okay. What else did I see here? Yeah, using your own equipment. Someone suggesting needs a mouthpiece. So if you look at the end here, and we'll come back and look at the best practices pipe in a minute, but we would recommend adding a mouthpiece to this. Okay, and we'll come back and talk about that. I mentioned the picture of the Brillo. here, this looks like it could be a piece of Brillo, but you'll see people build a screen because the crack is going to sit here. And we would recommend not using Brillo, but the brass screens, and we'll talk about why that is important in a minute. Okay. Someone suggesting using 5 screens, so again, that relates to this, and we'll come back and talk about what's best to use here and how many to use. Any other suggestions?
Someone was recommending using chapstick, which is a great recommendation. We talked a lot about burns and cuts to the lips, so chapstick can help keep your mouth protected from that and hydrated, or
yeah.
I don't know if that's the right word, but less chapped and prevent some of those cuts.
Yeah. Remember too, we didn't mention this earlier, but crack is a stimulant drug, and stimulant drugs tend to dehydrate the body. So if you've been using a lot, you may be more dehydrated, and then you know how easily your lips can dry out and then start cracking. That's another important thing to remember. Okay. Okay, so let's look at all the equipment and some of the things that we might actually recommend to this person here. Okay. This is all the equipment that is available through OHRDP. So we're going to go through each of these pieces, what they're used for, why you'd be using them, and some best practice recommendations around them. Okay, and that's a link. You can click that link to the OHRDP website for some more detail around each of those pieces. So alcohol swabs, these are different terms, so when people come in to your programs, they may be asking for wipes or pads. This is terminology that we came up with when interviewing and working with the peers from around the province. So these are just individually wrapped wipes, typically alcohol-based, and they can be used to help prevent the spread of bacteria. And they're really intended for single use only, but they can be used for all sorts of different things in terms of cleaning the surfaces used to prepare your equipment, making sure your hands don't have any bacteria on them, even cleaning off your pipes. So people will use those in terms of sort of prepping to use. But remember too, and we'll have a link to a video. We won't watch the video today, but we've provided a link to it in terms of how to prepare a crack pipe. But that's in an ideal situation. And again, when we're talking about best practices here, a lot of that has to do with ideal situations. And very often, people don't have or aren't using in places where they can stop and think and take their time. It could be that they're out in public. They may be afraid about the cops at the end of the alleyway, and they're just looking to get the fix and use it quickly, and they may not be taking the necessary time for all of these best practices. So remember, we want to encourage these best practices, but it's not always realistic for people.
And as Nick is going through the equipment and he's talking about the slang that we've heard around the province, just as a reminder, if you guys have heard different terms, I think that's really helpful to share with other folks.
So you have your alcohol swipes. The next thing you'd be thinking about is the glass stem. And this is other terminology here, tool, tube, pipe, or stem. They're just short little pipes. So I'm holding one here. You can see how short that is. But obviously this is a little bit longer than the picture of that homemade pipe that someone was using. Okay. And what else is important to know about these? Obviously, people put the crack in here, and it's used to then inhale the vapor. The ones that are being distributed through OHRDP are made of Pyrex, and that's a particular type of glass that is more shatterproof and heat resistant. So these are not going to break nearly as easily as some of the other types of glass that are available out there. Right? And obviously they're not releasing toxic fumes such as paint cans. And ideally, if you can see here, and I showed you in the picture earlier, you're inserting some screens in one end and you have a mouthpiece on the other. Okay. I don't know if you've ever been into a convenience store and seen one of Okay, I first saw these when I was down in Hamilton at one point, but these little novelty flowers that you can often on the counters in the convenience stores, but this really is a crack pipe, and that's what that is. Okay. But the difference between these two pipes is the one from the convenience store, this glass is thinner, more fragile, it's definitely going to splinter and break much more easily than the Pyrex ones that we're distributing through harm reduction programs. I guess at some level, if you don't have access to the Pyrex ones, at some level using this glass pipe from a convenience store is probably safer than a pop can, for example. So we might encourage that, but really we want people to use the Pyrex glass. Okay. I think Nadia's going to jump in there. Nadia, feel free to unmute your phone too if it's easier.
Another thing about the thinner glass pipes that Nick was showing is they also might transmit heat more as well. So it's the shatterproof that can cause the cuts, but also the heat that can cause the burns to the mouth.
Okay. So we've been talking about these adding these screens, and this is where that picture of the Brillo becomes important. Okay. So the screens are put in at the end of the pipe there because you're going to place the crack rock at the end here. And if you don't have a screen in place and then you just go and inhale, you're just going to inhale the rock of crack. So you need something to block it, but you need something that allows the vapor to come through. And this is what we recommend. These brass screens, these are the ones being distributed through HRDP, and they come in packets of 5. The concern is if people aren't using this, they may be using Brillo. And the concern again with Brillo is when that stuff heats up,
Have joined the conference.
it can have toxic fumes on it or chemicals, but it also is not very heat resistant and can start breaking down, and you then start inhaling little bits of metal and fragments, and you get those in the back of your throat, your lungs, and that is not a good thing. These brass screens are much better. They're more heat resistant. They're not going to break down in the same way that the Brillo does. They also don't have any chemical coatings on them. Okay, so those screens should be fit nicely inside the pipe, nice and snug. You want them snug enough that when you inhale, you're not inhaling all the screens too. So they want to be nice and snug in there. And let's just show you that. So here you can see this pipe here, the fitting nice and snug in here, and you just you push them back a bit so you can fit your crack in the end here. And you can see also here we have a mouthpiece on this pipe here. So, sorry, let me just show you that picture again. So this is one using those brass screens. So I'm going to pull up a poll here. How many screens do you think you should use? Poll number 4. Okay. So how many screens would you suggest people use? 5, 7, 10, as few as possible, or other?
Desiree Rhodes
Has left the conference.
And we will bring up another file in a minute in terms of showing, demonstrate how to pack these properly. Okay. So let's see how people are answering this question. The majority of people are suggesting using 5 screens. Some people saying as few as possible. Right. Some people maybe not so sure. The answer is there is no correct answer. Okay. It really comes down to personal preference, but there are some things to keep in mind. So let me just pull up a file here. This is if you look at the first file there, preparing screens, you can download that while we talk. But when it comes to using those screens, sorry, I'm just trying to find a place to put this. Sorry if you were trying to click on it and I moved it. Right. when it comes to using those screens, it really depends on your own personal preference, but we don't want people using the Brillo, although people may be more familiar with that. It can be quite easy to pack the Brillo in, but as we said, it's not a good idea. So we might want to actually show people how to pack these screens properly, and this was some work that Rob Boyd at Sandy Hill in Ottawa had done, and they actually were able to show that if you actually show people how to pack these properly and get them practicing with it, people get more familiar with it, more comfortable with it, and then they're more likely to use the correct screens over the Brillo. One of the things you don't want to pack this too tightly though, because what would be the problem if I pack too many screens in here? I'm going to see what you guys say. So type in the chat box there. If I pack too many screens in the end of the pipe, what would be the problem? Oh, I just realized the answer is sitting there on the screen. Sorry. So we'll see how many of you are paying attention, but maybe you have some other reasons. Yeah, as it says on the screen there, though, if you pack too many in, you're not going to get enough airflow. Okay. So some people, 5 is often a number people use, but some people prefer more. Some people prefer less. It really is a matter of practice, getting to know it. And I would encourage you as workers, if you've never done this, actually get some of those screens and use that document, the preparing screens document, and go through that. I think I have a picture actually here. Yeah, so these are some pictures from that document. And practice folding them. Practice using the push sticks, which we'll talk about in a second, to actually get the screens in place and see how easy or hard it is and how much practice that can take. Nadia, I see you've raised your hand if you want to say something.
Good morning, everyone. One thing to remember for outreach workers, if you have petite hands and it's no problem for you to be able to manipulate those screens, that may not be the case for some of your clients. They may have larger fingers, larger hands, have lower dexterity, and manipulating those screens will take a while. So giving them the opportunity to practice and figure out maybe 3 screens work for them, maybe it is 7, maybe it is 10. Also, if someone is outside in the cold, their hands are going to work less, will be less nimble, and it'll be difficult to manipulate those screens as well. But just keep being, I guess, persevere with this messaging constantly with your clients about the screens.
Yeah. Another thing I would encourage to recommend to folks is maybe preparing your pipes before you get your drugs, because often once you get your drugs, you're ready to go and you want to use, and you become more rushed in terms of getting your pipe together. So maybe it's a good idea to try and have your pipe ready to go before you start using, right? And if you know you're going to be using for a long time, maybe prepare 2 or 3 pipes. And we'll get into this later. You don't have to use a new pipe every time you smoke, but if you're going on in an extended session, or if you're going to be using with multiple people, maybe have several pipes good to go so that they're ready and you're not fumbling around, particularly when you're intoxicated or getting the shakes because you've been high for a while, and it becomes a lot harder to put these together. So maybe giving some pre-thought to before you use and getting them ready to go.
Nick, if I can add something. I know a couple of programs have shared with me, this is Natty again, folks, that when people have shared with them that they're going to go to a party setting and they will be smoking crack, they've often taken colored electrical tape and put it on the end, so every individual had a different color, so people would remember which pipe was, which stem was theirs.
Yeah, great harm reduction tip there. Okay. I'm just going to close the file box there, but
Amy
again,
Newley
has left the conference.
So these push sticks, they're just literally sort of little wooden dowels almost, and they kind of resemble chopsticks, and this is some other terminology for them, but these are used to help bend and push and get those screens into place. Okay. and that document from OHRDP would show you how best to use those. So you're literally sort of pushing and nudging and getting those screens nice and snug in there. They can also be used for another purpose. So if you've been smoking, as you smoke crack and as the vapor travels up the pipe, some of it actually gets deposited on the inside of the pipe. And if you've been using it for a while, your pipe you'll see a sort of black residue inside. And for some people, when you don't have your last hit, when you've run out of drugs, you can scrape the inside of your pipe and get one more hit out of that. So these push sticks can often be used to remove the residual leftover drug that's sitting inside the pipe. And then we really encourage people to use either a mouthpiece, lip protector. The material is made from vinyl. It's a clear vinyl that's being distributed through OHRDP. When you're ordering it from OHRDP, it comes in a big long roll, and then you can chop it to whatever size you like. Typically, people are going to use it, chop it into sort of 1.5 to 2 inch lengths. This particular pipe here, you can see that's maybe 1/4 of an inch that's been used on this pipe here. Again, that comes down to personal preference. The reason, though, we're encouraging you to put these on here is just another layer of protection, particularly if that pipe's getting hot or maybe there's a little crack on it. Or if you're in a situation where you only have the one pipe and you're sharing, you may be able to put your own mouthpiece on and someone else can put a different mouthpiece when you pass it on to them. And this is really, again, just helping give an extra layer of protection for the mouth.
And having that increase in length, Nick talked about having it maybe 1.5 to 2 inches is, if you can show that mouthpiece again, that can be, something that small can be harder to get on and off, which might be good if it's your own pipe and you're not planning on sharing. But again, as Nick mentioned, if you share the pipe and you just exchange the mouthpiece, that can be much harder to do with a shorter mouthpiece.
Personally, I find that hard to get off. Again, it's personal preference. Some people would find that easier, but I think a little bit longer one for me would be easier just to pop off. So again, here's that recommended pipe. Oh, one other thing though. Some folks, we've heard of anecdotally, some folks getting really creative with the mouthpieces and using actually very long lengths of tubing. And what some people will do is actually have a really long mouthpiece on here. And they'll hold the pipe down, I'm just trying to show you, they'll hold the pipe down here and have the tube run all the way up their arm and just pop out of their coat jacket. So this is particularly if they're outside, and they can just discreetly pull on the pipe or breathe on the mouthpiece there and hold the pipe down there. And it can be a more discreet way of using rather than having an obvious pipe in your mouth. We've heard of people doing that. So I think when it comes to handing the stuff out, you may want to have pre-cut pieces, but you also might want to let people cut their own lengths, right? So that's your recommended pipe there. Any questions around that? Scott's just typing a message here. Okay.
Nick, it's Nadia, if I may, sorry.
Sure.
You just mentioned, and I just sort of, I want to make a small, I don't want to say correction, but
Yep.
I would suggest programs not allow clients to cut their own tubing just in case their hands aren't clean and they touch other pieces of the tubing, if just from a hygienic perspective, and depending on what you're using to cut your tubing.
I think that's a good clarification. Thank you. So yeah, I didn't intend to mean that they would actually come and chop their own, but ask them and then do it, cut it for them for the length that they would like. So thanks for catching that, Nadia. So we've talked about all the individual pieces of equipment there, but how we actually distributing it. And sometimes it's just a matter of handing out the particular pieces that people want. Sometimes, though, we're going to hand it out as a kit. And this is just an example of a kit. Again, this will vary from program to program in terms of what you would put in a kit. But this was a sort of typical example of what you might have in there. So you might put one stem, 2 packets of screens. So remember, each packet contains 5 screens, 1 push stick, and then a mouthpiece, or maybe a couple of mouthpieces, and then alcohol swab. There are some other things that you can include in the kits, and we'll come back and take a look at those in a little bit. But let's talk a bit, and this is where I want you guys to raise your hands or type in the chat box. But what are the pros or cons of distributing the pre-packaged kits? Let's think about, handing out the individual pieces of equipment versus putting it all together. What are some of the pros, some of the cons? We've got a number of people chatting here, so let's see what people say. I haven't been scrolling. I have to apologize, folks. I had scrolled up in the chat and have not been seeing all the people chatting away. And I was like, why is no one chatting here? It's because I had scrolled up earlier in the history, and the last thing I saw was Scott saying 5 screens, and no one had chatted since. So I apologize for that. Okay. Okay, so I see Scott saying wasted supplies, and I think this is a big one for us to be thinking about. We definitely want to make equipment as readily and as easily available to people, and by putting it all in the kit, that may be one way of doing it. On the flip side, though, people may not need all of that equipment, and the same goes with the injection kits that we hand out. So there could be wastage of supplies there, and OHRDP have a limited supply of stuff that they can distribute. As we see increasing demand for these programs, there's still that limited pool of resources. So we want to really try and encourage, if people are taking stuff, that they're actually going to use it and not just throwing it away. That's for sure. What else is there?
There was also a question somebody asked, and Nadia, I'm going to ask you to answer this. Someone asked, what of all the things, maybe Nick can go back to the kit example of all the pieces of equipment that are included. Which of these pieces is the most expensive? Nadia, if you want to jump on.
Well, the stems are probably the most expensive but most critical. And the mouthpieces are the least expensive, I believe, but also equally critical. Like, I think the 3 pieces that have to go hand in hand together are the stem, the screens, and the mouthpiece.
Yeah.
If you're giving out stems alone, you might be causing more harm than you are good, right? Because what else are they using with that stem if they don't have access to safer options? So I would say you've got to be giving the 3 out together.
Yeah, and a couple of people have raised some important points on the chat, that there may be opportunity to really educate people more about the different 3 components that Nadia was just talking about. This equipment was just made available through OHRDP in July of 2014. So people might not be as familiar with it. And we talked, Nick talked about educating people on how to use the screens, having those conversations with folks. Really, drug use can be very ritualistic. People get into their set ways. There can be a lot of resistance to change. I know Nadia could speak to that for the whole rest of the webinar probably, about a lot of resistance to some of the newer stuff that the products to be introduced. So really taking the time to show people the benefits, show people how to use it, can really increase that uptake and use and decrease the likelihood of harms being caused. And so when you're giving out a kit, as people were pointing out, one of the pros might be people might be like, oh, what is this, and what's the purpose of this, and really open that dialogue and discussion.
It's really important to realize people may not want a second stem. They may want to use their glass stem several times, but they will need more screens. The screens will shrink once they're heated, and they'll start in that shrinking, move around more and cause a little bit more harm. So you want them to be able to get rid of those screens. There'll be residue in that stem, so they're going to want to try to get as much as they can out of that, the money they spent on that drug.
Yeah. So yeah, as Nadia said, there may be reeds in the pipe, the stem, but maybe giving extra screens and chopsticks to pack them. Okay. Anything else there? Okay. All right. You know, one of the concerns though is that putting those kits together is labor intensive. It can take some time. May not necessarily be feasible, but a lot of agencies are using volunteers and peers to assemble the kits, and I think this is a great way of involving people. Let's not forget that many of the folks we're working with are highly stigmatized, highly isolated, have been sort of pushed to the edges of society, and this can be a way of bringing people back into health and social services. And I think while we talk a lot about these kits as tools for disease prevention and transmission, I think just as equally important is their role in terms of a tool for engagement. So if we can have people coming in, sitting around, talking, sharing their experiences, helping out, it gives them a sense of community, a sense of purpose, and it can be a really great way for engaging people in your organization as well. And as Nadia is saying too, you'll find that if you ever sit down, and it was an amazing experience for us to sit down with the peers, you learn so much from these folks when you're sitting there and listening to them, sharing their insights and stories. They'll tell us what works, what doesn't work, why they prefer this, why they don't like that, and you'll get all sorts of insights if you do that. So really, I'd encourage you, if you're not doing that, to engage with people that are using drugs in an effective way and in a meaningful way, and have them help us out as well. We could have a whole webinar on terms of whether people are volunteering or peers and whether they're paid. I think there are roles and opportunities for both of those pieces, though. I think we talked about this, but yeah, so individual pieces may still be requested, though. So again, when you have your site there, you may have some prepackaged stuff, but also all the individual pieces so that people can come and pick up whatever they need. The kits sometimes may be helpful, particularly if you're doing street outreach. It's easy, quick to hand out, but keeping both kits and individual bits of equipment, I think, is critical. Pam, I think you raised an interesting point. I think people may be triggered by handling the equipment, so there's opportunities definitely for discussion around that. I think that's where, as agencies, though, you have to think about who makes a good fit in terms of a volunteer or peer, and having those conversations about whether people are ready. And I know of folks that have tried their hand at doing peer work or volunteer work and realized that they couldn't do it because it was too triggering for them. So I think that's an important point. And it's about building those relationships, right? And having those that sort of ongoing support for people. So in terms of overall best practices, handing out stuff in terms of the quantities requested, and not requiring people to return their equipment, but really encouraging them to do so. So we're not saying we'll only give you a pipe if you bring back your old stuff. But we obviously don't want people just chucking the stuff anywhere or leaving it in parks or playgrounds. So again, it may be a matter of giving them a container to put their stuff in once they're done and asking them to bring that back. And we talked about the importance of prepackaged and individual pieces. Remember that people are much more likely to take stuff that is more discreet and easy to carry around. OHRDP, and I forgot to include a slide around this, but do have bags available. They have both clear bags, so like this one here, right? And they also have a dark-colored bag, plastic bags. So if you think about this, if someone walks out, you can see what's in there. It's not nearly as discreet, so you may want to consider the type of bag you're putting stuff in. But ideally, it's just nicely packaged up and, again, easy to slip in their pocket. Remember, too, though, that people may be coming in to pick up for others. So you may have someone come in and say, I want 20 pipes. And then they're distributing those to other people that may not be accessing our services. And this is, again, where it's important to consider the role of people that use drugs in terms of reaching out and reaching folks that we may not have coming into our services. There's all sorts of barriers for why people may not choose to come and find us where we are. So reaching out and using peer networks is important. And remembering, too, that you may actually be handing out a lot of equipment to someone. So have those conversations. Make sure they're not going to waste that and that it's being handed out. You know, if someone's walking out of the health unit and they've got a big yellow container and lots of plastic bags, that's not nearly as discreet as in a brown paper bag or maybe in a plastic bag, right? Or an old shopping bag. These were some optional things, and this is where programs can get really creative. Sometimes this depends on your budget and resources, but there are other things you might want to consider including in prepackaged stuff. Lighters. Much safer to use than matches, easier to use, but also less likely to burn. Everyone loves a lighter. Some programs will even have those branded so that people know where to come, or with your program phone number on there. Right. Where did we see this, CC? Was it Windsor? Down in Windsor, folks, this was a really great thing we'd never seen before, but people are including hair ties so that when you're trying to light your pipe, you've got your hair tied back and not setting it on fire. So that was a great tool for engagement again and just having other conversations. We already mentioned the lip balm. Bandages maybe to cover any cuts or bruises, abrasions. And drugs and sex, for some people, drugs and sex go hand in hand, so including condoms and lube is never a bad idea. Someone had also on the call a couple of days ago had suggested maybe latex gloves. That might be another thing, or nitrile gloves. Some people may like to have gloves when preparing all their equipment, or if they have cuts and abrasions on their hands. I'm sorry, I can't recall what SMD, where's SMD? Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit, I'm guessing.
Has left the conference.
Suggesting chewing gum. That's another great thing, particularly when we're talking about stimulant drugs in people's mouths and they're getting that clenching. It can help release the tension there, and they're more likely just to chew on the gum, keep their mouth salivated. So chewing gum is another great idea. The idea that we have existing harm reduction programs in place. So if your program is new to this, just combining the crack smoking supplies with existing injection drug use supplies and embedding these within existing services. And in terms of when we're handing this out, so I think this is where the inhalation equipment or crack equipment differs slightly from the injection drug use equipment. With the injection drug use equipment, so that's the needles, the cookers, the filter, the water, all of that stuff is really intended for one time only. But we've been talking about how people may reuse their crack pipes and the screens maybe last a while before they actually loosen. So when would you actually throw this out? And it would be really recommended if anyone else has used it, then throw it away. Okay? If it gets cracked, splintered in any way, throw it away. Get rid of those mouthpieces if they're burnt. And again, Nadia was mentioning earlier, the screens can shrink. So once they do that and become loose, knock them out and replace them with some new ones. So the idea is, it's not like injection equipment where you'd be preparing a new pipe every single time you smoke, and that's an important consideration. And in terms of where you're throwing this out, it really varies from around the province, whether you put these in biohazard containers or not. So we would ask that you just check with the local health unit and figure out what's best in your region. Part of the concern there is that there are a limited number of biohazard containers, and this stuff can really start adding up in terms of filling those. So just check in terms of whether you need to put the stem in there or not, or whether the chopsticks would. That's going to vary from not province to province, but community to community. Just wanted to show you a picture of a meth pipe, and I want to emphasize here that these are not available currently. We don't know if they will ever become available, but if you are wondering the difference between a crack pipe and a meth pipe, they are different. And whereas crack, you actually put the drug in and put the flame directly to it. With methamphetamine, you actually drop the drug inside this glass bowl and then heat it and vaporize it. I put this in because this came up on the call last week. Depending on where you are in the province, methamphetamine may be an issue or not. And what are people using to smoke methamphetamine? This is ideally what they would be using. Can you use a crack pipe if you don't have a meth pipe? It is possible. I think the concerns, though, around disease transmission with meth, you still have some of the concerns around oral health, but typically people are not smoking methamphetamine, particularly if they're going on a run. They're not smoking it as often as they would with crack, because crack is a short-acting drug. You have to keep smoking in order to maintain that high, whereas meth, it's a much longer-acting drug and lasts.
Have left the conference.
So you're probably not having to use the pipe as often, but just wanted to show you an example of these. You can find these in head shops around the province, maybe more so in larger municipalities and less so in smaller areas, but just wanted to show that. I don't know if anyone has any questions as it relates to the difference in the pipes, or in particular around methamphetamine, but just wanted to acknowledge that. Okay. Anything you've missed? Or not necessarily that, but in general. I'm just waiting to see what the question here is, or comment. So Joel's asking around what is the cost for these meth pipes. I can only talk about the meth pipes that you can buy at a store a couple of blocks away here in Toronto, and they'll range from $3 to $20 depending on the type of the pipe. The one I'm actually handing in my hand is made from Pyrex glass, and it is actually the same manufacturer as these pipes here, but we don't know right now the uptake, whether these would be useful or not. They are expensive. I think they're at least $3, if not more, per unit. So these are expensive. I want to emphasize right now that there's no intention at this point to distribute these through OHRDP. We do not have the budget, and again, we don't know even if there would be the uptake. The manufacturer is Pegasus, so you could contact them directly, but you're going to have to come up with the money for that on your own at this point. There are a couple of programs around the province that have done that and are starting to do sort of surveys with people that are using meth to see whether they would use these or not. But right now, if you're interested in doing that, you're going have to come up with that money on your own, contact the manufacturer directly and see if you can negotiate a price for those pipes.
The price does go down the more you buy, but then again, that's more money up front. So it's all about supply and demand.
So as we learn more about those, we can send along more details. But again, just stressing right now, these are not available through OHRDP, and we don't anticipate them becoming available in the immediate future. Okay, so I just want to check up any final questions or comments, and then we're going to leave you with a few resources and talk about your certificates and evaluations. And this is your opportunity to ask, particularly Nadia, OHRDP, if there are any specific questions for her regarding the equipment. Any other sort of final observations people may have. Again, if you want to raise your hand, feel free to do that. All right, I'm going to just leave you with a couple things here. I'm going to pull up that file box again if you haven't had a chance to download some files here. So again, we have here that document. There's a document here that we developed, it's a sort of fact sheet about all the different supplies, a quick reference guide if you're sitting at your desk and can't remember something. Here's that really good document OHRDP developed around preparing the screens, and this is Lynn Leonard's recent research from Ottawa that you can download there. So those are all available for download. I'll leave that. I'm just going to move that box to the bottom here and just leave you with a couple of other resources. Right. Oh, sorry, this is a resource available through OHRDP, and I apologize for not uploading this document. So you can, I'm assuming you can find this on the website, on the OHRDP website. So you might want to look at that. And question around the PowerPoint slides, yes. The PowerPoint slides, we will email that out. Also, we will email the recording of this webinar, so you'll be able to watch it again if you want to watch a rerun. Right. Here is the best practice recommendations from Katie.
Has left the conference.
So this is a big, thick document that goes into far more detail than we talked about today. So I encourage you to download that, have a look at it. If you don't know Katie, they are the Canadian AIDS Treatment Information Exchange. They're a national organization that do knowledge exchange around HIV and Hep C, and they have all kinds of really good resources that you can order for free on their website. So pamphlets, posters,
Laureen Brachetto.
Has left the conference.
Magazines, DVDs. Right. And also on the Katie website, you can find a video demonstration on how to put one of these pipes together. So I encourage you to look at that, and that's another good engagement tool. Maybe sit down with clients and show them that video and then have a conversation about this. So we will be sending you an evaluation. That will come out in the next couple of weeks likely. It'll be an online survey, and we do really ask that you give us some feedback on whether this was helpful or not, what you would like to see in the future, any tips for us. So please do that. If you're interested in obtaining a certificate of participation, please send us an email to this address here. Just indicate your first and last name as well as the session and dates you've attended. You can do this if you attended the IDU one last year,
Ontario Health,
and then we will email you a certificate. May take us a couple of weeks to get those out to you, but that's how you get a hold of us there. And if you want to ask either CC or myself any questions, those are our direct emails. You can also visit us online for any other resources or to see what else is going on with us. CC, any final comments?
No, if there are any other final questions, now is really the opportunity to take care of, to take advantage of Nadia. You can also take care of her.
Nadia,
it's important to promote self-care.
Nadia, did you want to, any final things to add from your end?
No, I just want to remind people, if you do have questions at any point in time, never to hesitate picking up the phone or calling us or sending us an email, and we'll do our best to either answer your question or connect you with someone who may have the answer.
Okay, so I think we've reached the end. You can simply hang up your phone and close your browser window, and that'll disconnect you from the call. Hopefully you'll receive an email from us in a couple of weeks.
Has left the
Thanks,
conference.
everyone.
Senna Bennett.
has left the conference.